As someone that truly got into comic books during the early to mid 2000s, the Ultimate Marvel Universe is something that has held a dear place in my heart for many years. In fact, Brian Michael Bendis' Ultimate Spider-Man series is not only one of the first comics I ever remember truly reading issue by issue, but still one of my all-time favourites today. In this two-part video series, I want to take a look at the rise and fall of the Ultimate Marvel Universe. In this video specifically, we're going to look at the state of Marvel Comics in the years leading up to the new millennium, the factors in which led the company to launch a new reboot-like universe, and how the early issues of this new series were received, and the impact they had on the larger world of Marvel Comics. While the Ultimate Marvel imprint didn't premiere until the release of Ultimate Spider-Man issue 1 in October 2000, the factors which led to its creation can be traced back throughout the previous decade. As we've touched on in several videos prior, the 1990s was a difficult time in Marvel's history, and by late 1996, the company found itself in financial disarray, forced to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. While the company was rescued from extinction by a consortium led by Toy Biz co-owners Ike Perlmutter and Avi Arad, it was clear that in order for Marvel to return to its former glory, major changes had to be made. One of the men who led Marvel Comics in this period was Bill Jemas, a former lawyer turned entrepreneur who had worked with Perlmutter and Arad during the takeover, and essentially served as Marvel's unofficial publisher thereafter. One of Jemas' first acts after the takeover was to replace existing editor-in-chief Bob Harras with his close friend and writer Joe Quesada. The fact that Jemas, who made his name as president of the trading card company Fleer, wasn't a so-called comic book guy in comparison to those who had previously led Marvel could have been seen as an advantage, as he wasn't afraid to break from the consensus long established by writers and editors with an untouchable affinity for the source material. Case in point, Jemas determined the main factors in Marvel's decline. The company was publishing stories that were all but impossible for teens to read and unaffordable to boot. To solve this, he proposed a hard reboot on the Marvel Comics universe, resetting the status quo back to how it was in the late 1960s, and allowing readers to return to a more streamlined and familiar universe. While Quesada was initially skeptical of Jemas' plan, he eventually relented and the pair set about the so-called Grand Zero initiative. They both knew that this had to be a well thought out and executed plan, in order for it to have far more longevity than the failed Heroes Reborn relaunch the company had attempted in years prior. In Jemas' mind, they had to turn our middle-aging heroes back into teens, in order to relight the fire which had burned so bright during Marvel's heyday, and win back their young adult audience who had both grown out of the camp and silliness of the Silver Age and grown tired of the overly gritty and uninspired Dark Age. Nevertheless, the spectre of Heroes Reborn hung heavily over Jemas and Quesada's heads. If the company was to reboot its characters and jettison decades of storytelling, would it be possible to do so in a way that didn't upset long-time fans, the same way Heroes Reborn had? While Quesada questions how they would explain this change in continuity, similar to how DC Comics reset their universe with a crisis, Jemas proposed to simply relaunch their most iconic books with little to no explanation. No convoluted sci-fi, just the basic and classic elements of the characters. As a result, a compromise was made. Jemas' idea would be put to the test. Spider-Man and the X-Men would receive new number ones with a hard reset, but Marvel would continue to publish their original series with their continuity intact. These new reimagined stories would take place in a separate continuity from their established counterparts and would allow Marvel to make bold changes to beloved characters without affecting the existing norm. And with that, the nucleus for the Ultimate line of comics was born. With the premise decided, Marvel set about finding a writer to bring their new line of books to life. Several months went by after this point with very little success. Jemas at one point compared their search to kissing frogs, but with little sign of a prince. Until Joe Quesada made a fateful phone call to a then unlikely solution, a largely unknown and independent comic book writer named Brian Michael Bendis. Bendis, who had made his name writing Jinx, a crime noir reimagining of the classic Sergio Leone film The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, had a mutual friend with Quesada, artist David W. Mack, who had recently worked with him on his Marvel Knights imprint. Mack had actually recommended Bendis to Quesada previously. With this in mind, Quesada got in touch and asked Bendis to pitch a contemporary reimagining of Spider-Man's origin, and what he gave them in return was about to change everything. When writing the treatment for his new take on Spider-Man, Bendis intentionally avoided making heavy callbacks and references to the original Stan Lee and Steve Ditko series. On the other hand though, Bendis also sought to avoid the easy trope of leaning too heavily on contemporary culture and immediately dating the series, because while this was a modernised version of Spider-Man for the new millennium, it had to feel natural in order to succeed. The best encapsulation of Bendis' success, I think, is in the final page of issue 1. Throughout this 45-page introduction to this new Spider-Man, Bendis had resisted introducing the iconic costume, any mention or suggestion of a supervillain, and even holding back the urge to include thought bubbles, making the title feel very grounded and very human, until the very last page, where we see Peter discover his new abilities hanging upside down from his bedroom ceiling. All he has to say, "Whoa, cool." Jemas and the executives over at Marvel were thrilled with Bendis' work on Ultimate Spider-Man, and anticipated the series to be a smash success. In fact, Jemas had so much confidence in the book's ability to sell that he made a bold decision. He argued that one of the reasons why comic sales had begun to slump in the mid-90s was due to a rapid growth of comic book shops, believing that taking the titles away from the general public and into niche stores damaged the long-term success of the industry. Therefore, he pushed for Marvel to distribute the series into major chain stores such as Walmart and Payless Shoes, and allow audiences who wouldn't usually pick up comics the opportunity to do so. While sales figures of the first issue of Ultimate Spider-Man don't sound all that incredible, estimated at around 55,000 copies, this risky strategy proved to be an extremely smart one, creating intrigue and buzz around Marvel's new series from places that wouldn't usually discuss graphic novels. Instead of relying on Wizard magazine for publicity, Ultimate Spider-Man received glowing praise in Entertainment Weekly. Despite its modest sales figures, Ultimate Spider-Man put the entire Ultimate Universe on the map, with the stage set for a huge commercial success with the next series they released. So what came next? Ultimate X-Men. Ultimate X-Men was a project that Jemas and Marvel had wanted to get off the ground for as long as they did Spider-Man, but struggled to find the correct writer to launch the property, even rejecting Bendis' own pitch for the series, before settling on another seemingly unlikely choice, a Scottish writer famous for his work on Judge Dredd, Swamp Thing and The Flash, Mark Millar. Millar had recently begun his run on the DC Vertigo series The Authority, and had garnered a reputation as a unique and somewhat controversial writer, one not afraid to tackle taboo social issues within his work and infuse a heavy dosage of his own political views. This came into play greatly in his later work, but it seemed to be a good fit with the X-Men, a team already known for their political and social undertones. And with that, Millar brought the harsh, realistic tone that had worked so well in The Authority to the X-Men series. He outlines his thought process towards writing the series in a 2002 interview with Sequential Tart, stating that, "You're not competing with Cartoon Network on these books, you're competing with Buffy. Superhero comics aren't adult, but they shouldn't be written for 5-year-olds either." However, in comparison to Bendis, who intentionally tried to deviate from the traditional Spider-Man mythos, Millar's take on the X-Men did this seemingly by accident. You see, while the writing style of Millar might have on paper fit the X franchise very well, the writer was admittedly somewhat unfamiliar with the extended X-Men lore, and ultimately based his iteration of the team solely off the recently released motion picture, which included dropping the popular vibrant X costumes in favour of a more militarised and uniform black attire. Despite this though, the initial sales proved Ultimate X-Men to be a hit, with issue 1 doubling the sales of Ultimate Spider-Man's first issue, estimated at around 115,000 copies. The success of Ultimate X-Men proved to Gemmas, Quesada, and those at Marvel that their approach towards this series was working. And with that came the big coming out party of the Ultimate line, marketed as a colossal summer blockbuster brought to you on the page, as Millar teamed up with artist Brian Hitch to create The Ultimates. Released in September 2002, The Ultimates is a very different series from its predecessors, both in terms of Marvel's Ultimate line of comics and the classic Avengers comic book series. When asked to summarise what the series was, Hitch proclaimed it to be a widescreen cinematic composition, a live-action Avengers blockbuster brought to the pages of comics. And in a sense, it did just that, introducing many elements later adopted in the 2012 Avengers motion picture, including the villainous Chitauri and a Samuel L. Jackson inspired Nick Fury, and set the blueprint for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But despite this, the new version of Earth's Mightiest Heroes, as created by Millar, was a notable departure from the classic versions of the team. You see, as we discussed prior, Mark Millar rose to prominence thanks to his controversial work on books such as The Authority, and his penchant for infusing real-world social issues into his comic book storylines. And there are few better examples of Millar doing this than in The Ultimates, reimagining the Avengers as a paramilitary task force for a government agency, led by a somewhat rash and nationalistic Captain America. With one of the book's most famous lines saw Cap declare, "Surrender, you think this letter on my head stands for France?" To complete the set, Ultimate Thor was depicted as ambiguous as to whether he was actually Asgardian or just an insane man with alien tech. Iron Man was an excessive alcoholic billionaire, which, albeit, isn't too radical a departure, and Hulk a raging cannibalistic monster who, when not murdering hundreds of innocent civilians, threatens to kill Freddie Prinze Jr. for going on a date with Betty Ross, and when stopped by Thor, proclaims, "Thor's hammer makes Hulk horny for Betty." And this is where my problems come into frame. You see, Millar's desire to inject social commentary into his work is admirable, and when executed properly can make for incredible stories, see Civil War. However, it's questionable as to whether subverting the traditional iterations of the Avengers in order to discuss themes of nationalism and the war on terror was necessarily the correct strategy when introducing these new versions of the characters. I'd argue that foremost, Millar had to present new yet familiar depictions of the Avengers that the readership could genuinely connect with, much like how Bendis did with Ultimate Spider-Man, and then once the audience has bought into these characters, use them to discuss these larger social issues. The problem with this though is the difference in tone and style between Bendis and Millar is a little jarring, and as the sole two contributors to the Ultimate Universe so far, it could have raised a real issue, with the world presented in Ultimate Spider-Man feeling incredibly different from the one established in Ultimate X-Men and The Ultimates. Regardless though, The Ultimates was a huge commercial success, with issue 1 estimated to having sold almost 150,000 copies. In terms of commercial reception, The Ultimate Universe was 3 for 3 in its new titles, and as a result, began to grow bigger and bigger. The rise that this line of books achieved in its first few years was nothing short of meteoric, but with that, a steep decline would soon follow suit. Hey everyone, thank you for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new here. Also make sure to leave a comment down below. Let me know what your thoughts were about the video, and if you have any questions, I will be more than happy to try and answer them. Part 2 of this video will be up next Wednesday, where we discuss what happened to the Ultimate Universe after this point and its state into becoming what we know it as today. If you enjoyed this video, there should be some more videos on screen like the one you're watching that you might also like, and if you want to find a written version of the video, you can find it at my website, owenlexcomics.com, and there will also be a link to it on the screen. That's all for me. You can follow me on Twitter, just at owenlexcomics, and I will see you all next Wednesday. So until then, take care and keep reading.